The history of political parties. A lot of people think this is actually boring, but it's pretty interesting. There's different eras in political parties, and when we look at, what is a Democrat and Republican, a lot of these things have flipped and switched over the years. So there's five different eras of political parties. We had the beginning of our country, the 1794 to 1824. That's where the first two political parties came into existence, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. This is where Hamilton and the Federalists were basically, they got the banking and business interests versus Thomas Jefferson and the farming mass people interests. 1828 to 1856 is the Democratic Republican versus the Whig Party. Andrew Jackson actually dropped the Republican Party and just called themselves the Democrats. They were the party of the average people, and the Whigs were those that represented the rich industrialists and the southern plantation owners. Then we have 1860 to 1928. The Civil War brings realignment. Slavery splits both parties, the Whigs and the Democrat Republican. The Whigs actually disappear, and abolitionists in the North start the Republican Party. Lincoln was elected in 1860, and Republicans were basically in power for the next 60 years. So you had the first 1860 to 1896 was the first era of Republicans, and then you had the second is 1896 was like the nastiest election on record. William Jennings Bryan, the Democrat, was called in a league with the devil by followers of William McKinley. The Wizard of Oz was actually written to back Bryan. Follow the Yellow Brick Road was about gold. Click the Silver Slippers was about the silver standard. McKinley won the election, and the Republicans stayed in power for the next 32 years. And then after that, you had basically the stock market crash, and then you had Hoover not doing anything. So in 1932, FDR in the New Deal came in. So it's 1932 to 1964. Americans wanted government to help fix the economy, and they wanted regulations on business and spending to create jobs. There was a slight break with Eisenhower in the 1950s, but after that, Kennedy and Johnson were swept back with the New Frontier and the Great Society programs. And then in 1968 to the present is the divided party era. Basically, this is where we have divided government. Richard Nixon was elected, but he was a Republican, but the Congress stayed in Democratic hands. We had the era of one party in control of Congress and then the other party in control of the uh, executive branch. Uh, G.W. Bush Jr. was the first person in a long time to actually control of both the executive and the Congress until his second midterm election. Then with Obama in the beginning of his term, he had a democratically controlled Congress. And this is very rare since 68 to the present. With more voters being independent, it would be hard for a party to control both branches of government. It's also good to note since the 1960s with civil rights legislation, the South actually was Democratic since the Civil War, but slowly began shifting to the Republican Party because of the Civil Rights Acts. Finally, in the late 1990s, the last of the Southern Democrats became Republicans. You actually can see the flip where you can see the Republicans in the Northeast were actually now Democrats, and in the South they were always Democrat. I'm sorry, but now they're Republican. So the history of political parties has changed quite a bit. It's very interesting. And we'll see if a lot of people say we might lose the Democrat or Republican Party in the near future, might have some other party. Those predictions in the 1980s, 1990s, 2000 haven't happened, but you never know. It might happen. We might have a brand new party.